All right, welcome to another deep dive. You guys sent in some amazing stuff on neuroplasticity.
Yeah, awesome topic.
So we've got, let's see, we've got some articles here on boosting brain power, especially in those like really little kids.
Early childhood, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Early childhood. We've all got an article here on how neuroplasticity can help with mental health issues.
Really interesting stuff.
It is, it is. And then somebody sent in the pretty in-depth research article from a scientific journal exploring the role of neuroplasticity in development, aging, and neurodegeneration. That's a mouthful.
It covers a lot of ground.
It does, it does. So I think we've got a lot to unpack here. Maybe we could start with you just giving us like a quick definition of what neuroplasticity is.
Sure. I think a lot of people think our brains are like static, like we're born with a certain number of brain cells and that's it.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
that's not true at all. Neuroplasticity means our brains are constantly changing. They're rewiring themselves based on our experiences, what we do, what we learn, even our environment.
You said rewiring. That makes it sound like some kind of electrical system.
Well, in a way it is. Our brains are made up of billions of neurons, which are like tiny little wires, and they communicate with each other through electrical and chemical signals. So when we learn something new or have a new
Right
experience,
now, while we're talking.
exactly, new connections form between those neurons, and those connections can get stronger or weaker, depends on how often we use them. And
So that's the rewiring part.
yeah, and it goes even further than that. Like, we can even grow new brain cells.
What? Really? New brain cells? I thought we were stuck with what we got, after a certain age.
Nope. It's called neurogenesis, and it happens mostly in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is super important for learning and memory.
So that's how we make new memories. Huh. That's pretty cool.
It is, and this whole, this idea of neuroplasticity, it's not just about making new connections. It's also about getting rid of connections we don't use anymore.
Oh, so like pruning, like you do with a tree or a bush.
Exactly. Our brains are constantly fine-tuning themselves, making sure the connections that are important get stronger, and the ones we don't need fade away.
So like use it or lose it.
Yeah, exactly. The more we challenge our brains, the more we learn new things, the stronger and more adaptable they become.
That's a good reminder for me to pick up a new hobby or something.
It's never too late to learn something new. And speaking of learning, this article about boosting brain power in early childhood, it really highlights how crucial those early years are for shaping the brain.
Yeah, it's amazing how much happens in those first few years.
Yeah, it's like the foundation for, everything else is laid down during that time. Like not just learning, but social skills and even things like resilience.
Resilience, like bouncing back from setbacks.
Exactly. And the article talks about how important play-based learning is for all of that.
That's so interesting. So it's not just about like, giving kids toys and letting them go wild. There's actually a real purpose to play.
Absolutely. When kids engage in pretend play, they're using their imagination, they're problem solving, they're interacting with others.
Yeah, it's like their own little world.
Exactly. And all of that stimulates their brains, helps those neural connections grow and strengthen. There's even a school in Indonesia.
Yeah, I think I saw that. Sekolah Pelita Harapan.
Yeah, that one. They've like totally integrated play-based learning into their curriculum.
It sounds like they really get it. So play is important. What else? What other things can parents and educators do to, boost those little brains?
Well, physical activity is huge.
I could see that. Running around, getting energy out, all that.
It's not just about that, though. When kids are physically active, it increases blood flow to the brain, which helps with, everything. And it helps with those neural pathways developing.
Right, right. I actually remember reading a study about how physical activity in young kids was linked to better attention spans.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does. Like if they're not moving enough, they're not going to be able to focus.
It's something to think about, for sure.
It is. And, oh, the article also talked about creativity, right?
Yes. Things like music, art, even just building with blocks.
So important.
It's not just about, like, being artsy. These activities actually engage both sides of the brain, which is pretty cool.
Both sides. So like the logical side and the creative side working together.
Exactly. And that helps the two hemispheres of the brain communicate better, which is important for, well, basically everything we do.
Wow, that's amazing. So like if a kid is, writing a song or painting a picture, they're actually giving their brain a full workout.
They are. And these early interventions, they really do have a lasting impact. Like they set the stage for lifelong learning, being able to adapt to new situations, being resilient.
So it's not just about like getting good grades in preschool. It's about setting them up for success in life.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Those early experiences, they really shape the brain in a way that, affects us for years to come.
It makes you realize how important it is to like create the right environment for kids, give them those opportunities to explore and learn and grow.
Absolutely. And speaking of how neuroplasticity affects us throughout life, maybe we can move on to this article about its role in mental health.
Yeah, let's do that. This is where things get really interesting, I think.
It is fascinating stuff.
So this article from Access Integrated Mental Health, uh, I was reading through it and it really kind of blew my mind a little bit.
How so?
Well, it's like when you think about mental health issues, it can seem kind of,
Hopeless?
yeah, hopeless, like, oh, this is just how I am. I'm always going to be this way.
Right.
But this article is saying that because of neuroplasticity, that's not necessarily true.
Not at all. Our brains can change, even in adulthood. And that means that, even if we have mental health challenges, there's still hope for improvement.
Yeah, that's what I thought was so cool about it. Like, it's almost like a superpower or something, this ability to like rewire our brains.
It is pretty amazing. And understanding how neuroplasticity works is helping us develop more effective therapies for, a whole range of mental health conditions.
Like what? What are some examples?
Well, they talked about stroke rehabilitation in the article.
Oh, right, right. Because after a stroke, people can lose like the ability to speak or move certain parts of their body.
Exactly. And for a long time, people thought that damage was permanent.
Yeah, like that's it, you're done.
But now we're seeing that with the right therapy, the brain can actually rewire itself to compensate for those damaged areas.
That's incredible. So like even though part of the brain might be damaged, other parts can step up and take over those functions.
Yeah, it's like the brain finds a workaround.
It makes you realize how powerful the brain really is.
It does. And they even mentioned this story I read in Wired about this special unit at Johns Hopkins.
Oh yeah, the brain rescue unit?
Yeah, that one. And they're doing some really cutting-edge stuff, like using ketamine.
Ketamine. Isn't that like an anesthetic?
It is. But it turns out that in small doses, it can actually enhance neuroplasticity, make the brain more receptive to therapy.
So it's like it kind of loosens things up, makes the brain more flexible.
That's a good way to put it. And they're even using, get this, dolphins in therapy.
Dolphins, what do dolphins have to do with stroke recovery?
Well, it's not fully understood yet, but it seems like the interaction with the dolphins, it's like really stimulating for patients. It creates this positive, enriching environment that seems to help with recovery.
So it's like the dolphins are like cheering them on or something.
Maybe. It's definitely a unique approach.
It is. So we've got ketamine, we've got dolphins. What else is out there?
Well, the article also talked about meditation.
Meditation. I would have thought of that as like a brain-changing thing.
It might not seem like it, but mindfulness practices like meditation, they can actually change the structure and function of the brain.
Really? Like how?
Well, studies have shown that regular meditation can increase gray matter density in certain parts of the brain.
Gray matter. That's like the good stuff, right?
It is. And the areas that see the most growth are the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision-making and emotional regulation, and the hippocampus, which we talked about earlier. That's important for memory.
So meditation can actually make those parts of my brain bigger and stronger.
It can. And that can have a real impact on, managing stress, reducing anxiety, improving focus.
So those few minutes of quiet time each day, they're not just about relaxing, they're actually like a workout for my brain.
I like that, a workout for your brain.
It makes you want to like go download a meditation app right now.
Right? It's pretty powerful stuff. And the article also touched on how the brain adapts to sensory loss.
Sensory loss, like if someone loses their vision or hearing.
Yeah. And it's amazing how the brain can rewire itself in those situations. Like, for example, in people who are blind, the visual cortex, the part of the brain that normally processes sight, it can actually start to process tactile information instead.
So they're like seeing with their sense of touch.
In a way, yeah, it's like the brain repurposes that area to make up for the loss of vision.
It makes you realize how adaptable the brain really is.
It is. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with LTP, long-term potentiation.
Oh, right, right. That was about how connections in the brain get stronger when we use them a lot.
Exactly. And it applies to everything we learn and experience. Like the more we practice a skill, the more we engage in a certain activity, the stronger those neural pathways become.
So it's not just about like trying something once. It's about consistency.
Exactly. Whether it's learning a language, playing an instrument, or even just trying to break a bad habit, consistency is key. It's what strengthens those connections in the brain.
Makes sense. So like if I want to get better at, say, playing the guitar, I need to practice regularly, not just every once in a while.
Right. Because each time you practice, you're strengthening those neural pathways that are involved in playing the guitar. And over time, it becomes easier and more automatic.
So neuroplasticity is kind of like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
That's a great analogy. And it's encouraging to know that we have this ability to shape our brains throughout life. to keep learning and growing.
It is. And speaking of lifelong learning, let's dive into this scientific journal article exploring the role of neuroplasticity. This one gets into some really in-depth stuff.
Yeah, it's a bit more technical, but it provides some really fascinating insights.
Let's hear it. What are some of the key takeaways?
Well, one of the main points is that, while neuroplasticity is most active during childhood, it doesn't just stop when we become adults.
So our brains can still change, even as we get older.
Yes, it might happen at a slower pace, but it's still happening. Our brains are still adapting and rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
That's good news for those of us who are a little bit past our prime.
Definitely. And the research also talks about these things called critical periods in development.
Critical periods, what are those?
They're like specific windows of time when the brain is especially primed for certain types of learning.
Like when kids are learning to talk.
Exactly. That's a classic example. Young children can pick up languages so much easier than adults because their brains are wired for it during that critical period.
So it's like if you miss that window, you're out of luck.
Not necessarily. It just means it might take a little more effort.
So it's still possible to learn a new language as an adult.
Absolutely. It just might take more time and practice.
Okay, that's good to know. And what about neurogenesis? Remember, that was the birth of new brain cells.
Yes. And the research shows that neurogenesis continues in the adult brain, primarily in the hippocampus.
So even as we age, our brains are still making new brain cells.
They are, which means that, we still have the capacity for growth and change.
That's incredible. It's like our brains never really stop developing.
In a way, that's true. And the research also highlights how both our genes and our experiences influence neuroplasticity.
So it's nature and nurture working together.
Exactly. Our genes provide the basic blueprint, but our experiences, our lifestyle choices, our environment, all of that interacts with our genes to shape how our brains develop.
So it's not just about what we're born with, it's also about what we do with it.
I like that. It's about taking an active role in shaping our own brains.
Right. And there was this one concept that really caught my eye in the article, the Doohad hypothesis.
Oh yeah, that's a fascinating one.
Can you explain what that is?
So DOHAD stands for Developmental Origins of Health and Disease. And the hypothesis basically says that our early life experiences, even before we're born, can have a huge impact on our health and well-being later in life.
So, like, what happens to us in the womb can affect our health as adults.
Exactly. And it's not just physical health. It can also affect our mental health and even our susceptibility to things like neurodegenerative diseases.
So, like, if a pregnant woman is stressed or malnourished, that could have consequences for her child's brain development.
It could. It highlights how important it is to create a healthy environment for pregnant women and for young children.
It makes you realize how interconnected everything is, from the moment we're conceived to the end of our lives.
It does, and it brings us back to this idea that, neuroplasticity is this incredible gift, this ability to change and adapt. But it also requires effort from us, to cultivate and maintain it throughout our lives.
It's like we have this amazing potential, but we have to, nurture it.
Exactly.
So knowing our brains can adapt and change even as we get older is encouraging. But I think a lot of people, they worry about, their brains declining as they age.
Right. It's a common concern.
Yeah. Is there anything we can do to, protect our brains as we get older, to keep them sharp?
Absolutely. While it's true that neuroplasticity decreases with age, that doesn't mean it just stops working. Our brains are still capable of change, even in later life.
So it's not like, once you hit a certain age, your brain just starts to go downhill.
Not at all. And one of the keys to maintaining brain health as we age is building up what's called cognitive reserves.
Cognitive reserve. I've heard that term, but I'm not really sure what it means.
So think of cognitive reserve as like a buffer against the effects of aging and potential damage. The more we challenge our brains throughout life, keep them active and engaged, the stronger this reserve becomes.
So it's like, if some parts of the brain start to decline, there are other parts that can step up and compensate.
Exactly, like having extra connections and pathways in the brain that can help us maintain our cognitive function.
Makes sense. So what are some things we can do to, build up this cognitive reserve?
Well, exercise is a big one.
Exercise. I thought that was just for the body.
It's good for both. Physical activity increases blood flow to the brain, which is important for, keeping those brain cells healthy. And it boosts the production of BDNF, which is a protein that's essential for brain health.
BDNF, I'll have to Google that later.
And exercise can even stimulate the growth of new brain cells.
So all those years of jogging, maybe they were paying off after all.
It's never too late to start. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Just getting your heart rate up for 30 minutes a few times a week can make a big difference.
I can do that. What else?
Cognitive stimulation is key. Basically anything that challenges your brain and makes you think.
So like Sudoku, crossword puzzles, that kind of thing.
Those are good. But it can also be things like learning a new language, taking up a new hobby, or even just engaging in stimulating conversations.
So instead of like, vegging out in front of the TV, I should be learning to play the piano or something.
Or having a lively debate about current events, anything that gets your brain working.
Right, right. And what about social interaction? I'm sure that's important
It
too.
is. Socializing involves communication, empathy, problem solving. All those things stimulate different parts of the brain.
So hanging out with friends, going to parties, that's good for the brain.
It is, and it's not just about having fun. Maintaining those social connections can actually help protect against cognitive decline as we age.
Makes sense. So challenge, stimulation, and connection. Those seem to be the key ingredients for maintaining brain health.
You got it. And the best part is, it's never too late to start incorporating these things into your life.
That's great news. So neuroplasticity, it's this incredible ability that allows our brains to adapt and change throughout life, but it's not something that just happens automatically.
Right, we have to be active participants.
We have to challenge ourselves, keep learning new things, stay connected with others. Like, we have the power to shape our own brains.
And what's more empowering than that?
It's amazing. This whole deep dive into neuroplasticity has been uh, eye-opening, to say the least.
It's a fascinating field, and we're still learning so much about it.
Well, thanks for sharing your expertise with us. I know I learned a lot.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
And thanks to all of you for listening to the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into well, whatever fascinating topic you guys send our way. Until then, keep those brains firing.